Welcome to another edition of Education Matters with me, Jim O'Connell. It's nice to have you watching and listening. If you'd like to partake, if you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got observations, please feel free to call in. The number is 640-3091. That's 640-3091. If you're watching live, it's Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock on June 4th. I can't believe we're in June already. Yes. Now, this week, we're in the second last week of school. It's hard to believe that time just goes by so quickly. The last day of school will be on June 13th, which is 9 days away. And then, of course, the other thing will be the June on June 15th will be the graduations for the high schools, and it was interesting. If you watch Channel 97, Channel 97 on cable in Manchester is a historical look of city events, and sometimes it's a Board of Mayor and Alderman meeting from 1996 or something, but there was one on the other night. It was the Great Flood of 2006 or 7 or whatever it was. It was just interesting. Just I drop on there sometimes when I'm flicking channels. I don't spend a lot of time watching TV, to be honest, even though I realize the strangeness of saying that while sitting here talking to you on TV. But it's interesting to drop on there and see some things. And I was just last night. What was on was the Memorial High School graduation from, I think, like 1996, 7 or 9, somewhere around there. And of course, it looked as though it was being held in the field at Memorial High School. Well, since the advent of the formerly Verizon Centre, now the SNU Arena, that's where the graduations are held. And this year, and all the high schools all hold them on the same day. And this year, they're on June 15th. So June 15th, and then they each year they alternate the order in which the high schools, the time of day in which they graduate, so that the same school doesn't get the prime spot, whatever that's perceived to be, either early in the morning or mid-morning or whatever. So the times are as follows. Manchester School of Technology will have their graduation at 8 a.m., followed by Central High School at 10 a.m., and then West High School at 2 p.m., and finally Memorial High School at 6 p.m. So, and that brings an end to the school year, and we get into the summer. So we've got 2 weeks before all of that goes on. We find ourselves approaching the end of the year, of the school year at least. Another 12 months gone by, and I find it. I was going to say shocking, but that implies that I'm surprised. But I am disturbed by the fact that we still have no resolution to the issue of teachers getting a cost of living pay increase as a minimum. After all this time, and talking to teachers, which I do pretty often, I'm told that they, a lot of them are pretty saddened. Some might be angry, but there's a terrible pall over our teachers that they've been asked to work again in the city of Manchester without a contract. It makes no sense that the city goes on not caring about the fact that thousands of people in our city are not getting a pay increase that they deserve. And I don't want to revisit all the nuances of the pay increase, but just let me touch off one point, because I think often it's lost on those who don't pay attention to it and don't care to pay attention to it or don't want to get into the nitty-gritty. But you would be forgiven for thinking that a pay increase is somebody's working in for the schools, and it gets to the end of a year, and they, like in any job, would say, well, the cost of living has gone up by 3%, and therefore I should get a pay increase, and that's what happens as pretty much a standard in private industry, despite what some of the screamers and shouters might say. But that's not the analogy to use with our teachers, because the contract, sort of the social contract, the sort of the understanding in the way in which we pay teachers in the city of Manchester and more largely across the country is school districts have over time. There was a time when a teacher of math with 5 years experience and a bachelor's degree and say a master's got paid X amount of dollars, and over time the teachers were asked to make concessions historically, and the concessions were, well, we can't afford to give you a pay increase this year, but what about if we pay the new people coming in a lot less than X because they're new people, and we'll work them up to X over a period of steps. So we'll pay them, let's say, X minus 10%, and then we'll give them 2% a year for 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, they'll be earning the X they would have earned anyway. Well, that's called steps, and in the city of Manchester, there are 14 steps. So a teacher who comes into the Manchester School District is hired, comes in as a science, a math, an English, or French teacher, whatever they are. They come into the school district and they start off on a pretty low salary, 36,000 a year, maybe 37,000. I haven't looked at it this year, to be honest, because I find it so disheartening. But they get paid something in that order, and most people who have gone to school and worked hard and were smart and intelligent and diligent, and also have empathy for kids and want to work to help to bring forth the next generation of smart kids and all kinds of kids to help them to live fulfilled lives. These people decide to go into teaching. I am amazed when I see the kids who graduated from our high schools 4 years ago, who are taking up positions in teaching and often in other states, etc. But I think to myself, what a just like we talk about people who join the military and people who do other things, and you think, wow, it's amazing the commitment of young people. And when I see young people committing to teaching, I always take notice of it, because I'm thinking that's a tough job to go into, where a group of I was going to say self-appointed, but let's not call them self-appointed because they're elected. A bunch of elected officials, and the whims of a public vote are going to decide whether and how much food you're going to put on the table for your kids for the rest of your career. That's a pretty tough ask. Now, previously, the idea was that you come in to teach and you had the rewards of working with kids and seeing their growth, but you had a job that was secure, and you had a job that had really good benefits, and the perks that went with it. Today, we have teachers whose benefits are under attack by people in the community, which I don't understand why the general populace has a problem with others having reasonable health care. And rather than trying to lift everybody, they want to tear down the few that do have it. Some people describe public sector jobs like the teachers as like the last bastion of the possibility of having middle class benefits. We have a caller coming in. Hello, caller. Good evening. Hello. Hi, caller.
Hi. I was just wondering what your rates are.
What are?
Your rates?
Rates?
Yeah, for like a session, like in person.
Yeah, I don't have. I'm sorry, I'm not following you. I don't have any rates for a session.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Who is this?
I think you've got a wrong number. Sorry, caller. Yeah, sorry. It's it sounded like it sounded like a caller, but obviously somebody wanted to know my rates. My rates are free, so I don't know anybody who'd want a session with me. I think it's more likely people would pay not to have a session with me than to have a session with me. I could charge people $10 an hour to allow them out of the room. I think perhaps maybe that's an idea. So back to this idea that the quid pro quo was that teachers would get this. So when we don't give teachers when we talk about not having a contract and not so therefore not getting their steps, it isn't just the fact that they're not keeping up with inflation or they're not getting some bells and whistles on top of what they were getting anyway. No. It's entirely different. It's like saying to somebody, why don't you come into the military and we're going to bring you in and we're going to have you as a corpsman, an infantryman, whatever. And we tell them, if you stay in 4 years and you do the following things, you're going to make, you'll go up through the NCO ranks, non-commissioned officers. And you'll go to, corporal in the army, or to sergeant, to master sergeant, etc. In the Navy, petty officer, CPO, chief petty officer, etc. And likewise, those who go in through officer training school, that you go in as a subaltern or a sub-lieutenant and lieutenant, and you work your way up through the ranks. And supposing you said to people who'd made that commitment and given you the 4 years or the 8 years, and you said, oh, well, we're not promoting anybody anymore. We're only going to take, if you're in for 10 years, you might still be a sub-lieutenant, because the deal we made with you back when you decided to come here is we're not going to honor it anymore. And the deal you made with some kid who was 21 years old or 22 years old, who came out of college and came into Manchester to work as a science teacher or a math teacher or whatever else in our schools, was, why don't you come in, and while you're 23 and 24 and 25, we're going to pay you some of the lowest rates that you could get paid in any profession in the state. But if you come in and you stick with it, we'll give you good benefits, and then in Manchester specifically, over the following 14 years, we'll give you a little bit more each year, over and above whatever inflation might be. We'll make you whole. So by the end of it, you'll max out. In the case of Manchester, if you've got all your steps and you've got the highest level of degree, a master's, etc., and you end up with about 75,000 a year, or somewhere around there. That's what the highest possible salary that a teacher can earn in Manchester. But it takes 14 years and a bunch of learning and degrees to get there. So when we don't pay, when we decide, as a city, or our public representatives decide that they can't pay this, then what happens? People aren't just left without their little incremental, inflation went up by 2.5% last year, therefore I'm 2.5% behind. No, you're an awful lot furthermore. And in Manchester, if I recall correctly, out of the last 7 years now, or 6 years, the teachers have been without a contract and therefore steps for 3 out of the last 6 or 4 out of the last 7. But whatever it is, it's a major amount. So I'm appalled. I've gone on too long on this already. I'm appalled that we're sitting here in the city of Manchester. We have 2,000 employees in our schools, including because now all employees in our schools, the administrative staff, the principals, assistant principals, the social workers, everybody, all the teachers, everybody is now out of contract. But the teachers themselves are and the fact that they're paying into a union to represent them, I have to tell you, I'm amazed that people aren't up in arms. And actually, to be truthful, I've heard from a few people that there has been a significant exodus from the Manchester Education Association, the Manchester Teachers Union, that a number of people have resigned or told them that they won't be paying their union dues starting from the beginning of this year, because they've pretty much had it. I know that there was a meeting, a union meeting held recently in one of our schools where a representative from the NEA, which is the National Education Association, but this one based out of Concord. That's the National Teachers Union, based out of Concord. They had a person, an employee, come down to explain to teachers who were threatening to walk. That the reasons why they should remain in the union. And that person, while they may not have been physically booed out of the room, they were told they were wasting their time, that teachers had given the MEA enough, and they were tired with the results of what they're getting. Now, I'm a big supporter of teachers. I think they're underpaid and undervalued, etc. And I know the people in the leadership in the MEA here in Manchester. I don't know what's wrong. I don't understand why things are as they are. I do know you can only lead people who are willing to be led. Perhaps people aren't militant enough, but we're losing teachers. We have people. We talked to the last 2 weeks on this program. I've had the good fortune, and I'm very grateful for the fact that I had a couple of middle school principals and a Manchester teacher here talking about some of the issues in our schools. And those principals and other principals have said, I've talked to high school principals who've said, and some have said it publicly, that they're fielding numerous teachers who are looking for letters of recommendation because they've been applying for jobs elsewhere. And so we don't know how many teachers we're losing now, but the numbers are increasing. And, sitting around fiddling like Nero did while Rome burns is ridiculous. And so that brings me to our Board of Mayor and Aldermen and to our school board. And, despair is too strong a word, but it bothers me a lot that this issue is not front and center. However, we did have an occasion at the last, first of all, at the Board of Mayor and Aldermen meeting some weeks ago. Alderman Herbert proposed that the tax cap be put on the ballot to ask the people if they supported, strangling our public schools in Manchester and not allowing them to have the things that every other public school in the state can have, the programs that every other state has, etc. We have the least well-funded school district in the state, as you all know. And so that, in the end, it was only supported by two other aldermen, and it was tabled. So that surprised me. And then we get to last week's school board meeting. And Paul Feely, who's the reporter for the Manchester City Hall, it says Paul, I'm reading from the Union Leader here on screen, it says Paul Feely, City Hall. And it says, second attempt at tax cap ballot question comes up short. So, writing in the Union Leader on Sunday, it says June 1st and updated on June 2nd, so on Saturday into Sunday. Paul Feely says, describes what happened at the last school board meeting. And what happened at the school board meeting was that school board member LaHoo proposed that a letter be sent to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen asking them to put the tax cap question back to the people and put it on the ballot for November. Because it wasn't on the agenda, then it would mean suspending the rules in order to pass. And this was just to have a letter sent to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen telling them that the school board wished the ballot, that the tax cap be put back on the ballot. Now, as it turns out, it needed 10 votes in order to suspend the rules so that such a question could be addressed right there and then on that night. And it turns out that the vote failed. So this is an issue that I just don't understand. Reading from Paul Feely goes back to talk about what happened at the Alderman meeting first, and he says last week's Last week's school board meeting included some unexpected drama as members fell one vote shy of passing a second attempt at getting a question on the city's tax cap. Then he refers to the one that had happened earlier. City Aldermen took a similar vote in March when board members opted to receive and file a request that a tax cap question be placed on the November municipal ballot. Voting in favour of the question going before the voters, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're in favour of eliminating the tax cap. I think it's a presumption for some, but at least putting it before the people. Voting in favour were Tim Baines, Chris Herbert and Tony Sapienza. Absent were Alderman John Cataldo and Elizabeth Moreau. The 9 remaining board members voted to receive and file, therefore killing it. They just said, we received it and filed it, put it away. Paul Feely goes on to describe how the tax cap was introduced in 2009 and how it limits revenue, expenditures, etc. And describes it by charter there are 2 minutes to get a question on the ballot. One is a majority vote of the board, mayor and alderman if the majority of just a simple majority of the board, mayor and alderman propose to put it on the ballot, then it would go on the ballot. Or you would get petitions from a percentage of voters on the checklist in all 12 wards. I don't know what the percentage is, but you would go out and collect signatures. At last week's school board meeting, and that's this past week, and after another round of speakers used the public forum portion of the night to lament the lack of a new contract for city teachers and other bargaining units, Ward 8's Jimmy LaHoo presented an opportunity for board members, unions and residents to work together on securing funds for new contracts. And he said, quoting Jimmy LaHoo, that opportunity comes in the form of asking the alderman to put the tax cap question on the ballot, said LaHoo. I think in a consensus vote on this board that we asked to have a letter drafted asking that we send the tax cap issue to the alderman. If we could vote for it, I'm sure we would vote for it and have it on the ballot. After that, we wait a week and we ask every bargaining unit to also write a letter, send it to the clerk, and we send it as a package showing that we are working together on this issue and want it addressed. The alderman already voted on that, said Mayor Craig, and LaHoo says we can do it again. So, as it turns out, there's a vote that's held, and when the vote is held, those in favour of suspending the rules to allow this letter to be sent were school board members Terrio, LaHoo, Gerard, and then Terrio moved the board suspend its rules and take on the vote of the matter. 10 votes were required to do so, and the motion fell 1 vote shy. There were 3 voted in favour of the. Why would it only fall? So Terrio, LaHoo, Gerard, and Ambrosi. The new Ward 2 board member Kathleen Kelly, Kathleen Kelly Arnold, Mary Georges, Leslie Want, Art Beaudry and John Averard. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 voted for it. Opposed were Mayor Craig, Dan Berger and Katie DeRochers and Pat Long. And because there were 2 members missing, Kelly Thomas and Lisa Freeman. Now, what bugs me about, and by the way, Jimmy LaHoo asked that this item be put on the agenda for the next meeting so that it would come before the next meeting, and then a simple majority would be able to send a letter. Now, just to delve into and I'm sorry we're getting into the weeds on Manchester politics here for a second, but it bugs me that we have 2,000 employees in a city without a contract, and mostly our aldermen don't seem to care. They certainly don't care enough to do anything about it, and they haven't been doing anything about it. And I know some of them, if they're watching this program, might find that very harsh. I'm sorry to say that. It's not that you're all the same or they're all the same in every way, but ultimately, if this was the, if the city was running CMC and the Elliott Hospital, we'd be in dire straits, because we'd have nurses and doctors without pay increases, and we'd have 14 and 29 public representatives wringing their hands, staring at their navels and pointing back and forth and getting nothing done for a whole year, a year and a half, 2 years, for the whole 3 years during the contract. And ultimately we'd have hospitals and doctors not being paid. If you can imagine, we live in a city with the least well-funded schools in the state. Can you imagine if we put the Board of School Committee and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Mayor in charge of the Elliott Hospital and CMC? Can you just imagine the mess they would be in? It's awful to say that. I'm a strong supporter of public enterprise and a strong believer in the public good, but this inability to stand up and call things out and say what we're doing to our schools is not good enough annoys me. Now, in Manchester, I don't want to accuse anybody of anything because this goes to motive, and we can never know what's in a man or woman's heart when words come from their mouth. But let it not be forgotten or lost on people that part of the political calculus here is that Mayor Craig, of course, like every mayor, is up for election every 2 years. And I think the reading of the tea leaves today is that she's probably a shoo-in to be re-elected. And I mean no disrespect to the Republican candidate who seems to be the only one, or the one who's designated to run against her, who is Victoria Sullivan. And I don't mean Victoria any disrespect. Victoria and I think probably view things very, very differently in many regards. But without putting a tooth in it, I don't think that she's a serious candidate for office. And I happen to also believe that she'd be a terrible candidate, just to be candid. So it seems to me that Mayor Craig has got the upper hand, and while nothing's ever guaranteed, it would seem to me that we'll have a Craig mayor for the next 2 years, starting again in January. Now, there are those in the city who would like to see that not happen, and one of the ways that they see that not happening is if they can marshal and energize the forces, anti-public school forces and anti-public enterprise forces, and ultimately some anti-city forces together in response to a threat to eliminate the tax cap, and therefore bring out as many ultra-conservatives as they can find, and that would help Victoria Sullivan candidacy or whoever else the nominee may be. And so that's the calculus on behalf of some who are voting for this, because they nominally at least oppose the tax cap. That's on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, of course, the reason the stupidity of the fact that what appalls and annoys me is that we have Democratic candidates or Democratic members of the board, mayor and alderman first, and then last week of the school board, voting against these issues of trying to stop a tax cap going on the ballot, because they don't want to have to deal with the fact that it might bring people who want to keep the tax cap out of their homes if it's a rainy night or whatever. I think both. I like to think, and in my more innocent days, I thought that Manchester local boards, like the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the school board, were above and beyond local politics, and that people used to say, the Democrats are doing this or the Republicans are doing that, and I used to say, can you show me the evidence of it? I'd love to see an actual block of Democrats on any of these boards take a stance and support each other, and less so, but likewise with the Republicans on these boards. I see them split in 20 different directions on every vote. There's no way of knowing how somebody's going to vote, certainly not based on some political philosophy. They may have similar opinions about national politics or something, but when it comes to, fixing potholes and opening, parks and etc., there doesn't seem to be any cohesion in Manchester. And when it comes to schools, there absolutely is no cohesion. So anybody who ever says to me that, the people who will say, Democrats and are trying to do this, that, and the other thing in the city of Manchester, and I say, I wish so. Because if that was the case, we'd actually have public funding, and we don't. So I really dislike, and I find objectionable, the fact that we have little politicians with a very small p playing party politics in the City of Manchester boards. And I think this stinks of it on these boards right here. I don't know how people can run for public office. Everybody in Manchester, well, not everybody, most public representatives in Manchester know that the tax cap is a problem for the City of Manchester, that it's choking off the ability of the city to respond to its burgeoning and exciting future, and in particular that is seen in our schools, and our schools have gone down in terms of funding, have got lower and lower and lower and lower and lower funding year after year after year. I don't mean in actual dollars and cents, but in comparison to what is needed. And the tax cap is being used as this excuse. We have 5 groups of public employees in the schools right now. The money isn't there to give them the increase that they clearly deserve. Just without knowing, you don't have to get into the details of we offer them this and we offer them that. All you have to do is look at negotiations and say, and people get lost on this idea of who was being fair to who and whether people were being honest and truthful with each other in negotiating. All you have to know about the negotiations is this, is that the amount of, starting off with the $2.5 million available, which would be money otherwise used to improve schools, etc., etc., the $2.5 million, it's a lovely number because it happens to coincide, if it were $2.1 million, for instance, it would exactly be easily divided by the 2,100 employees in the public schools. So when you divide 2,100 employees into the $2.1 million, you get $1,000 per employee. And what that would mean, if you spread it across the entire school district, is that if everybody got the equal amount, then every teacher in Manchester would get an increase of $20 a week, 50 cents an hour. Now, in private enterprise, when people get offered the only people who get offered 50 cents an hour are, people working in, sub-normal wage, minimum wage jobs. You give somebody who works at some, whatever it might be, I don't know, fast food place who's 16 years old, who's been there, and in their second year, you bump them up an extra 50 cents an hour and expect them to like it. For professionals who are doing the most important job, arguably, in the city, it's an insult. But that's where we start off from. And then we get into arguments. The arguments that go on within the negotiations are, well, if teachers gave up, and the way these are even spoken about drives me nuts, right? You'll have people legitimately trying to find a resolution, and they have no problem with saying that if we reduce the benefits here and we change the benefits there, that would give us savings of $950,000, and then we'd be able to put that into the pot to help us to afford these teachers and to pay them what they need, which effectively is saying, if the teachers would give us back the $950,000 from what they already have, and then we'll take it out of that pocket and we'll put it in a new wrapping and we'll hand it to you over here and say, there's your pay increase, done. It's a nonsense. Teachers are, they may not all be geniuses or whatever, but I got to tell you, they're not so stupid as to not realize that what the board of mayor and aldermen and what the school board is effectively saying when it talks like that is that why don't you pay for your own pay increase? And the whole premise from the very beginning is we're taking this artificial number and we're going to tell you this is all we can afford, not based on what the science of what the city can actually afford. Because, for instance, I think I saw the number that car registrations this year are $2 million over budget. So the city's taking in $2 million or so. I might be off by $500,000 actually, because but whatever. A substantial amount of money extra in car registrations. It happened last year because, the economy is booming. People are buying cars. They're registering now. All those nice big cars and SUVs you see driving around, they're all, $700-800 a year, maybe $900 a year in taxes. I don't know how much they are because I don't drive big fancy cars. But the revenues to the city are much higher than they would otherwise be. And because of the tax cap, we can't use the additional funding. How stupid is that? How stupid is it that if, at its most ridiculous, if somebody were to donate $10 million to the city tomorrow into the magically into the public coffers, then we're not able to increase our spending by 10 million. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so the tax cap is and has been a disaster for the city of Manchester, and it's a disaster for our schools. And to see petty politics being played on our school boards about it is very annoying to me. And I can see those who want to have the ballot introduced because they want to help, say, Victoria Sullivan. I don't care about that. I don't care that she might get an uptick as a result of it. I still think that the people on the board, mostly Democrats, but those on the board who have argued in the past against the tax cap, and they know the tax cap is doing damage to our schools, damage to the image of our city, and damage to real children, actual kids not getting the supports they need, kids falling off the edge, kids not getting an education, who are going to spend a lifetime not able to have to be fully functional in society. And that's happening on your watch, on their watch. And yet, because they're afraid they might lose their seat, they're going to vote against it. Where's the morality in that? I don't care about realpolitik. I don't care about the fact that, well, this is the way the system works, and what good will I do if I get thrown out of office? Then I can't do anything. My argument is, get thrown out of office. When did it become a career? You're a public representative in a glorified village in one of the tiniest states in the Union. It ain't that important. Go do something else. I'm sure there's lots of other places in the city where you could contribute your net good, and lots of charitable boards and lots of places where you could do your work. As a public representative elected to represent the people of Manchester, and especially on the school board where you're elected firstly, in my view, to represent the voiceless children of our school district, the 14,000 that you haven't already frightened away, the 14,000 that are left. The vast number of kids who go into school every day that moms and dads drop off, and sometimes and often nowadays grannies and foster parents and aunts and those who are left standing who haven't been affected by adversity. And these kids are being dropped into a school system, the school system with the highest level of poverty in the state, the highest number of free and reduced lunches, the highest number of non-English speaking kids, etc. And into that school system, we've decided to walk away and not give it the resources it needs. It's unconscionable that our public representatives would, when given the opportunity to vote to put the tax cap on the ballot, that they refuse to do so, while all the time knowing that it's the right thing to do. What they should be doing, they should be rushing down to City Hall to vote to put the tax cap back on the ballot, and then they should be spending every waking hour between now and November knocking on the doors in their wards and saying to people, you know what, a mistake was made in 2009. We used to be a city that was named by Forbes and others as one of the top 5 places to live in the United States, or one of the top 10 places to live in the United States. We had families moving here. We had schools that we could be proud of, great institutions that are 150 years old in some cases. The pride of the state of New Hampshire, the pride of the city of Manchester. Come look at our schools, look what we did. Go walk the halls of fame at Central, Memorial or West, and see the people and the faces of those who've gone before you, and tell the voters that what's happening to those schools is an atrocity and that it shouldn't be allowed to happen and it must stop now. Instead of that, we have weak-kneed, cowardly, self-serving politicians who are more interested in preserving their lousy penny halfpenny jobs sitting around a desk once every 2 weeks at board meetings. They're more interested in preserving the glory of that than they are in doing the right thing for the boys and the girls and the mums and dads of the city of Manchester who are sending their kids into schools that are becoming substandard, that got the highest number of kids in classrooms of any school system in the state of New Hampshire. It is abominable and inexcusable. And so while I like many of the individuals on these boards individually, and I talk to them regularly, boy, when they get together as a group, not the stupidity, because it's not that stupid, it's actually understandable. The lack of principle, the lack of morality, the lack of valor, the lack of public spiritedness, the lack of principle is appalling. Stand up for what you believe in. Vote to put the tax cap ballot on the ballot, and take it, and take the fight. Because I have to tell you, again, I want to say, I don't want to be unkind to Victoria Sullivan. She has not been, in my view, she has not been a friend of public education in Manchester, and we could debate here, and she's very welcome to come on here anytime she'd like to talk about it. But in my view, if Mayor Craig is worried about the candidacy of Victoria Sullivan defeating her in November, then God help us if she gets an actual strong candidate. We've got a caller. Go ahead, caller.
Jim?
Help me get off my soapbox. Who's this?
Phil.
Hi, Phil. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm getting a little hot under the collar. I'm glad somebody called in, took me off my... I was ready to start dancing up and down on this chair.
This will be my shortest phone call ever to public television.
All right.
Right. I just want to say 2 words to you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm going to say them again because I said only 2 words. Thank you.
You know, most times when people say 2 words to me, Phil, it's not thank you.
Well, can I give you 2 more then?
Okay.
You're right.
All right. I love it. Thanks,
2
Phil.
more?
Yeah.
Keep fighting.
I like that the best right there. Because
And then 2 more.
Yeah.
Sleep well.
Sleep. Well, you know what?
No, here's the last 2.
Yeah.
You deserve it. That's 3. I'm
That's
sorry.
true. All right. Thank you, Phil.
All right. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. God bless you, too. Bye. That's Phil Sapienza, and I got to tell you, you can. I appreciate that very much because, and especially coming from a guy that I like and that I admire, and somebody who I don't question, but has the interests of children. A man who's devoted his own life to teaching kids, and I had no question at all, but he has the best interests of both the city. I think he's a proud Manchester citizen and a good guy. Not to blow smoke at people, but I appreciate that call a lot. I don't want to be self-righteous. I don't want to be holier than thou. I don't want to be screaming from a pedestal or talking down to people or etc. That's not who I am and not what I want to be. But there are times in life where people have to stand up and call it like it is. And the thing that I'm not a big fan of President Trump's. Let me just make that clear in case anybody had any doubts. He's the president. I'm not a big fan of that. But one of the reasons I think that people like, obviously, forgive me, but obviously a reprehensible individual, somebody with very poor morals and no principles, and somebody who's a populist who says whatever he can to whoever's in the room and then does something else. And it's clearly not qualified, but albeit that he's our president. But it's easy sometimes. I was puzzled for a long time about how could such a person be elected by the great people of the United States into the highest office in the land. How does he get to sit in a room in the Oval Office behind a desk that had Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy and George Bush and Bill Clinton and whoever the list whoever your Truman and pick your whether you like them or not, Grant or go back as whoever you want with all their faults and failings, Nixon. And how can somebody like this, and I don't want to go off on a screed about President Trump, but one of the reasons is because people in the United States are fed up, sick and tired of politicians saying one thing and doing something else. Or politicians who are doing the calculus is all about how do we stay in office for another, in the case of a senator, another 6 years, in the case of a president, 4, in the case of a congressman, 2. How do I stay in office? Oh, I can't do that because I'll lose funding. Oh, I can't do that because that 5% of my constituency won't like it. Oh, I can't do this because that 5% won't like it over there. Oh, I can't do this other thing because, or vice versa, I'll do things that I know are wrong. I'll vote for things that I know are bad for the country because, I'm going to need that extra 5% in the western side of my state, or there's people in the southeast corner of my state, if I vote this way I'll get them. And so the calculus all the time is not about morality, not about what is the right thing to do. And I think that people see through it. I think that's the thing that brings someone like President Trump to office. Because people are just tired of it. And when you look at the public representatives, and I can picture the 29 of them, if they were sitting around here in a circle or a semicircle around me, that they'd be upset at me casting such aspersions on them. But the truth is the truth. Dr. John Avard, who, I suppose at its most simple, I would say, has spent, I think he's been there at least 5 terms maybe, but he spent a long time. That's a lot of nights, a lot of, cold winter nights going to meetings, a lot of subcommittee meetings, a lot of people phoning your house and complaining about things, a lot of work done. And he deserves gratitude for that, like everybody does. But I'm just choosing him because of what he said at the meeting the other night. And John Avard said, he's. I think he would be proud to be called a conservative. I think he is. He's a Republican and a conservative, and he has fought for the west side of Manchester in particular, and has been a stalwart. If you in his defence of say West High School as an example, and he's leaving. He's not going to run again, and he categorically stated at the meeting last week that people need to know that the tax cap. I'm paraphrasing him, but he effectively said the tax cap has been bad for Manchester and that it needs to be put in front of the people. Now, I was blown away to hear him say that so categorically. Here's a guy who was in charge of, union negotiations for contracts and, doing the job, I guess, that he thought was the right one to do, which was to get the least possible amount of money for teachers based on the fact that, and I'm not trying to be unkind to him, he did the work, and so the idea was because he had this constraint under this is all the money we have under the tax cap, and so, that's all we can do. So now you can, so now you can sit across from somebody, you can sit across from a starving family, and you can say, I know you actually need milk for the whole week. But I've only got enough. I'm only allowed to give you, you need a pint a day for the family. I that's 7 pints, but I know you're going to be really, malnourished and you're not going to have any milk for the week. But under this rule, I'm only allowed to give you 2 pints. So that allows this duplicity, this moral equivalence, this immoral equivalence to happen, where a public representative who knows that the right thing to do, the only thing to do, the moral thing to do is to give that family the 7 pints of milk that they deserve. And actually, we do have the milk over here, so just so you know. But we've made a rule, when you weren't in the room, that we're only giving out 2 pints of milk per family, and so here's the 2 pints. And then you're happy to read on the paper that there's a family starving here, and a family with distended stomachs over there, and a family with dysentery over there, and oh my, isn't it terrible what's happening in the city, and what are we going to do, and it's getting your reputation, but hey, here's your 2 pints. I'm sorry, the analogy doesn't really work. The tax cap is an artificial artifice, and it has had a terrible effect on the image, but more importantly on the substance of the city of Manchester. It's affected real kids in real seats in real homes, and it's affected real families of teachers. We're losing teachers. They are leaving the city, and we can't attract the best teachers because we refuse to fund our schools properly. And that comes down to one thing mostly, which is the tax cap in the city of Manchester. So now, to reread the names of those on the school board who decided, voting in favour of suspending the rules were school board member Terrio LaHoo Gerard, Sarah Ambrosi, the new Ward 2 member Kathleen Kelly Arnold, Mary Georges, Leslie Want, Arthur Beaudry, and John Avard. Those are the ones who said suspend the rules just to write a lousy letter to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to ask them to put it on the ballot so that you, the people, could decide. Let the best man win. Put it on the ballot and then fight for it or fight against it. Those who voted, those who opposed allowing the public to have the voice were, I'm shocked to say it, well, I'm not shocked again, I know, but I'm saddened to say it. Those who voted against it were Mayor Craig, Dan Bergeron, Katie DeRochers, and Pat Long. And I haven't talked to any of the four of them on this topic, and so, but they voted against it. So here we have this divide. Then Lisa Freeman and Kelly Thomas weren't available. So I suggest that if you're somebody who likes the tax cap and you want to defeat Mayor Craig, then you should call your aldermen and your school board members, etc., and ask them to put the tax cap on the ballot to try and bring out people. And if you're somebody who actually opposes the tax cap and wants our city to have the right funding, then I suggest that you go and if you're a Democrat, I suggest you go and call Mayor Craig and call others on the other members of the Democratic so-called caucus on the school board, the board mayor and alderman, and tell them that they should put the tax cap on the ballot. And when they give you reasons for why they can't do it and the realpolitik, but if we do that, then the people might vote against. Let them vote against you, then you're illegitimate. I would want to walk down the street, if I were on the board of mayor and alderman on the school board, I wouldn't care less if I was voted out after 2 years, knowing that I had done the right thing. Knowing that when I drove by a school that was being closed down in 5, 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, knowing that when I see kids who have gotten into trouble because they're 25 and 28 because they haven't had the education they should have had in Manchester, at least, as Phil Sapienza said, sleep well. At least I'll be able to sleep well knowing that back in the day, I did the right thing. I tried to explain to the people that what we were doing to our schools was immoral, unjust, and wrong. And the people didn't want to hear it, so they voted me out. So great. You know, I've been wrong often. I wouldn't be the last time I was wrong. It won't be the first time I was wrong. So great, I was wrong. The people heard it and they said, Jim, you're full of it. We hear you, but we think either your analysis is wrong or we don't mind the fact that we've got the worst schools in the state. They're the least well-funded school. Either way, we're fine with that, and we're going to close down our high schools and just make one, and we'll just double up the classrooms again, and we won't have any programs for kids with special needs, and we're okay with that. Because I got my rich house somewhere in the north end. I'm just going to sit around and, drink beer and chat to my friends over the cooler. Great. And I'll be fine. I might join them. I'm not going to fight with people about it, but at least for my own purposes, I'm going to be able to say, you know what, I was there and I did the right thing. How many of these people who are currently on our board of mayor and aldermen or school boards can actually look at themselves in the mirror knowing that our schools are underfunded? They all know it, they all say it. When I say all, I mean 99% of them. The largest majority of them. They all know it, and so it's a question of how we get there. And we're trying to do this funding, and someone will say, well, let's see if we can get $50,000, Jim. Let's see if we could put that towards it. It's all a nonsense. It's all playing games. It has to do with being a politician, saving face, preserving your position and your privilege. And by the way, they all have privilege already anyway. Like many of us, right? They already have the things that they need. There's not a great representation on our board, mayor and alderman, or our school board of the poor and the poverty stricken of the city. There's not great representation on our public representatives of those who are most in need of public services. So it's that's all awry as well. So there was a lot more I was going to talk about tonight, but I got waylaid on the whole issue of this tax cap voting thing that just drove me nuts. I was going to talk about there's going to be a major change in the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the school board because of the nature of the number of people who are going to be leaving or who have announced they're going, and I was going to go through that list. We'll have to leave it go until next week. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of a program. Indulge me. I hope I didn't drive you nuts with my complaining about this, but it does get under my skin. I thank you for your attention tonight. I wish you the best. I hope you have a great week. Look after your kids, hold them tightly, and go out there and let's fight for the city of Manchester and fight for its schools. And this will be the great city that it has become and will continue to be. And people like Mayor Craig, whose heart is in the right place, I think, can be convinced to do the brave thing, not the politically expedient thing, and stand up and fight for to put the tax cap on the ballot, and let's see this thing defeated so that we can move forward with our city. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great week, and all the best from Jim O'Connell. Good night.